Well, all right. How are you feeling?
Pretty good. You?
Yeah, I think I'm okay. You know, it's been a blustery day, so, kind of feeling like it's a good time to do a podcast.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is Mark Dustin and
Kevin Ballman.
this is Help is Not on the Way. How you feeling about yours? You want to start, or you feeling about mine? I think it's a me day.
Are we going to talk about deep sea drilling or Nazi resistance?
Oh.
Dutch resistance to the Nazis.
I think we should go Dutch resistance to the Nazis.
Okay.
That sounds like a leading story to me.
Let's do it. I read about this a while ago, and it kind of hit the news, or not the news, but it kind of hit the media maybe a year or two ago when I first saw it, and it caught my attention. So this was even before we were doing this podcast, but it's a great story. And it's about, what caught my attention was an article about two sisters, Freddie and Truus, I believe, Overstegen. I'm
Dutch.
probably going to butcher a whole bunch of things because it's, Dutch.
It's Dutch, yeah.
But they were, Freddie was 14 and Truus 16 when this story really gets going. They were living in North Holland in an area called Schoten, I believe. Now looks like Harlem to me, but it's two A's.
Two A's, yeah. Uh-huh.
They were raised.
It's probably actually what Harlem was named after, because the Dutch did actually colonize
that makes
New York.
sense.
Yeah. Stuyvesant and all that. Yeah.
And they were their mother. She was a member of the Communist Party, and taught the girls compassion for those less fortunate. So it's kind of how these girls were prepped for what was to come. They were housing Jewish refugees, so the girls were sharing one straw mattress, but they didn't mind because they had been raised to believe that they needed to help out those in need. So they were housing Jewish refugees, and in 1940, the Nazis invaded, and they were putting up propaganda and posters trying to get workers for the for Germany. And the girls started out by kind of going out and handing out opposition pamphlets and covering up the propaganda posters with warnings, which this was dangerous in and of itself, because if they were caught, they could be imprisoned or executed for it.
Wow.
And they're
14 and 16 years old. I mean, we're talking about
kids.
We're literally talking about kids.
Yeah. And they looked young. So it was one of the things that helped them to get away with this, was that they didn't look suspicious.
Yeah.
When the Nazis invaded, the family had to send the refugees away, fearing they'd be caught, due to the family's communist connections. And some of the people were caught and deported, and some were killed. So it really kind of lit a fire in the girls, and kind of prompted them to take more active role in the resistance. In 1941, a commander in the Dutch resistance asked them to join.
Wow.
It's called the Haarlem Council of Resistance.
It's interesting that they were in a couple of things that immediately come to my mind are the fact that they were so conscious as to how bad this was and was going to be.
Yeah.
Which is still pretty early days in the war. And then, and so they were so committed to their beliefs, and that they were willing to immediately risk their lives, like right away, and their youth. Their mom obviously was really, really a strong person, but I also find it really fascinating that the desperation was so great that the resistance is asking people of that age already to join.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like you're like, okay, we're starting with the 30-year-olds. We're going to start getting moving down. Okay, you're 18. They're already asking 14-year-olds to join, to help, to do anything.
And what's amazing about this is this resistance group, when they joined, totaled 7 people.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, this is a small group of people.
Yeah.
trying to take on
It's you and your friends, basically. Yeah.
trying to take on the Nazis. I mean, it's
You would
when you
also
think about it, it's quite something.
and have the difficulty of knowing who knowing who would be willing to join, because
Right.
if you're walking around asking people to join something, you could be just pointed out by somebody who doesn't agree or wants to save themselves their own necks.
Yeah.
It's a delicate balance there.
And something akin to that occurs later on in the story. Because you don't know who you're talking to,
Right.
and I assume this is kind of the thing probably in any country where there is like, revolution taking place or coups or whatever. You don't know who you can tell or ask certain questions to, and that had to be the case here. I mean, there were a lot of collaborators, a lot of Dutch collaborators. Initially, they were doing things like transporting communications and plans and weapons, kind of being couriers, because they could ride their bikes around without being stopped, because they just looked like kids.
Yeah.
They had, braids and ponytails and stuff like that. Obtaining false IDs. But then it led to, they became involved in things like sabotaging bridges and railways, and then eventually killing Nazis.
Whoa.
Which is what this story is kind of about. That's what caught my eye. I believe it was, some article titled like the Dutch teenagers that, killed Nazis or something along those lines.
I mean, I can't even the steel nerves that must have come from, growing up like that and having to.
Yeah. And there's a good quote. I mean, initially they were just doing things like going past the Nazis and calling out to them. There's a little quote in here that's pretty good. It was "Ha, Heinz, come here," they would call, often pretending to be drunk when they struck up conversations with the Nazis. Ooh. So the Nazis are like, hey, look, young girls that I could take advantage of.
Sure.
So
yeah.
But they would initially just kind of lure them somewhere where maybe someone else in the resistance could murder them.
Yeah.
So they might go out to the woods with a Nazi soldier and he would just not come back or whatever.
And it's guerrilla warfare at its at its core, because it's destabilizing. All of a sudden, the Nazis, the soldiers don't really know what's going on. They can't trust things. Hopefully, it affects morale. It affects confidence.
Yeah,
it's
you don't know who in the community is doing this, right?
It's essentially terrorism if you're a Nazi, but if you're them, it's survival, and it's the right thing to do. But ultimately, that's what they're doing. But it's so interesting how different perspectives.
Yeah, for sure. And they eventually were sent out on their own assassination missions, which they called liquidations.
Oh.
Yeah, that seems cold.
It is
right?
really cold. Yeah.
There's some liquidations to take care of today. Oh. The assassinations also ended up targeting Dutch collaborators, who arrested or endangered Jewish refugees and resistance members. But they also moved and hid Jewish refugees and worked in the hospital. So their job was wide ranging. But what this kind of led to, I mean, it was there's a quote here that kind of like how do you do that? How do you do this job, right? But here's a quote from Truce, who said, "While I was biking, I saw Germans picking up innocent people from the streets and putting them against a wall and shooting them. I was forced to watch, which aroused such an enormous anger in me, such a disgust and a feeling of, quote, dirty bastards. You can have any political conviction or be totally against war, but at that moment you are just a human being confronted with something very cruel. Shooting innocent people is murder. If you experience something like this, you'll find it justified to act against it." And so I think that's how, the idea of assassination, it just seems like so hard to do. But I guess if you're watching this happening and you're seeing this happening on a daily basis.
Right. Well, and also, we think about this from where we stand. Yes, we can intellectualize to some degree the horror of it and et cetera. But we ask ourselves the first thing that you want to ask yourself is like, well, why would they risk their lives to do this? They don't have to.
Right.
But every single day is another day they may be the one against the wall.
That's right.
And they have no idea when.
Or their friends.
Or their friends.
Or their family.
So then you're in a position where it's like, well, why not do this? If it's my day tomorrow, maybe I can do something today. You know,
maybe I can take some down with me.
Exactly. If I'm going anyway,
Yeah.
at least maybe I'll take someone with me, you know, or create or help in some way.
Yeah. And what gets interesting about this story is that in 1943, they're joined by Hani Shaft. And Hani was a little bit older than them. Mm-hmm. I believe she was 22, around there,
right,
when she joined. And she had always been into politics and social justice. Her parents encouraged her when she wanted to go to college to become a human rights lawyer. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's in the 40s, you know, which is pretty interesting. But she was forced to drop out because she refused to sign a petition in support of the Nazis, mm-hmm. which apparently, from the sound of it, most students refused to sign. They were not going to support that. So she had to drop out, but she had become good friends with a couple of Jewish students, Sonia Frank and Filene Polak, and took them into hiding when she dropped out. Mm-hmm. And she began in a similar way to the two sisters. She began by stealing ID cards for the Jewish, residents that, in order to help them survive.
Yeah.
She didn't want to be a courier once she joined, though. She wanted to go straight to the weapons. So she, like Freddie and Truce, became a saboteur and an assassin.
Wow.
And they were, burning down Nazi warehouses and all sorts of things like that. She did refuse some assignments, though. Apparently, some of the assignments were kidnapping the children of the Nazis.
Oh.
And if the mission failed, they had to kill the obviously a huge morale crusher on the Nazi side of things, but clearly morality on their side. She felt it was too similar to what the Nazis were doing, and
right.
She didn't want any part of that. But for Hani, things got a lot more. It sounds like a lot more dangerous than even for the two sisters. The two sisters survived, and they're I don't know if they're both still alive, but there have been more recent interviews with them. Mm-hmm. And they talk about the reason that they did it, and it was the right thing to do. But it wasn't like, this wasn't a we've talked about what the reality of war is, mm-hmm. right? And so this was not like what we see, quote, patriots on TikTok, talking about going off to, save the Republic and defend the Constitution.
Exactly. It's frantic. It's confusing.
Yep.
It's a mess. Nobody knows what they're doing. Everybody's, there's nothing elegant about it.
They talk about the nightmares and the terror that they would wake up, in night terrors, and they suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder. Sure, yeah. It was they couldn't sleep. It really took a toll on them, but they survived, and unfortunately, Hani Shaft did not. Mm. So she was involved in some an assassination where she went with another member of the resistance, and there was their target was shot by Hani, but he shot back and hit her collaborator, her resistance member. He was wounded and had to go to the hospital because he was shot in the stomach.
Right.
He thought he was. So this is the part of the story that goes right back to not knowing who you're talking to. He believes he's talking to Dutch resistance members, but they're actually Nazis or Nazi collaborators anyway. Uh-huh. And he gives up Hani's identity and her address.
Oh, so the person she went with got shot but didn't die, and
right.
he thinks he's helping by speaking to his own people, yes. and mentions her, his right. collaborator on this assassination. and instead he's talking to the
Now,
wrong people.
I believe, because I mentioned that there was only 7 members in the resistance, at
Right.
least that Harlem, resistance. But eventually there were hundreds.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And after the war, they found remains of 422 members of the resistance. So one was a woman, and that was Hani.
Really amazing. So she was picked up.
She was picked up, and in order to get her to confess, the German authorities arrested her parents and sent them to a concentration camp.
Yeah.
So she stopped, her work, was no longer a part of the resistance, at least temporarily. Her parents were released after 2 months.
Wow.
Yeah.
Seems
odd.
right.
Maybe they ran out of room. They needed,
space
Right.
issues.
Exactly.
Because the Nazis, they're concerned about overcrowding.
Right.
Make anyone uncomfortable. Unduly uncomfortable.
Exactly.
Oh boy.
But you know what? So she ended up, because she had red hair.
Oh, very.
And
you could see her coming a mile away.
She had been, because of her red hair, she had been put on the Nazis' most wanted list, and she was known as, the woman with the red hair, something along those lines. But she dyed her hair black and wore glasses, and joined the resistance again, which is super cool. However, she went straight back to assassinations and sabotage, as well as being a courier and transporting illegal weapons and newspapers.
She's
and things
awesome.
like
I mean, okay, so she's already faced the wolf head on. She's luckily been let go. Her parents were already taken away. She's already had that threat. She could, at this point in her life, say, I've done enough. I did my part. My parents are safe. I got lucky.
Yeah, I'm
I'm
out.
just going to put my head in the sand and wait this thing out.
Yep.
And she doesn't. She goes right back to it.
She goes, and so she eventually gets arrested at a military checkpoint in 1945 while distributing an illegal newspaper.
5 years she gets to do this.
Yeah.
Throughout.
Well,
I'm sure back and forth and.
She didn't join in 1940.
Okay.
She joined in 1943, so she had a couple years. The other sisters had joined in 1940.
They were right away. Yeah.
41.
Okay, so she gets 2-3 years in, and she wow, but still, it's a long time. I mean, it's a good amount of time to create some havoc. Hopefully, she did a lot of damage.
Right, and she was actually transporting secret documentation for the resistance, and she was brought to a prison in Amsterdam where she was interrogated, tortured, placed in solitary confinement. And she was eventually identified because they found the roots of her red hair.
A little time had passed and her hair grew out. Yeah.
And she was executed by the Dutch Nazi officials in 1945.
Wow. Did they say how she was executed?
No, they don't say.
Firing squad.
But it was
a normal
just
thing then.
months before the end of the war.
Wow.
Too. So she almost made it.
Almost made it.
Almost made it. What's crazy about this too is, as I mentioned, she was the only woman remains of the Dutch resistance that were found. So of all 422 members that, remains that they found, she was the only woman.
Wow.
Which is crazy.
deserves
It's
some
quite
honors.
quite the heroism there. But because she was a member of the Communist Party as well, and they celebrated her as an icon, communism was in the 40s, a big fear around the world.
Right.
And so they didn't want to commemorate her. They didn't want to celebrate her. And when the communists tried to hold a commemoration, the police and tanks showed up to prevent them from doing it.
Oh, yeah. They don't want anyone to they don't want the Communist Party to ever look like they're doing
Right.
anything good or positive role models for
Right.
anybody. Yeah.
Even though, it's like you could certainly hate the party and celebrate the person, but they didn't want to do that. But since then, I mean, they have,
Yeah.
and all of these women have been celebrated.
Oh, good.
For what they've done, and their streets named after her, and memorials and commemorations have happened, and all sorts of things.
Wow.
But What an awesome story it was to have read, and it's just kind of an inspiring story, even though it ended up badly for Hani.
And the sisters did similar things. They joined earlier. They were in for longer, but they would sort of lure. And Hani probably did too, but they would sort of, like, as you said, they'd act drunk, or they'd be coy, or maybe try to lure a guy.
They'd go to the bars, whatever, and find soldiers that were a little drunk maybe, and lure them out for a little nighttime rendezvous, and then kill them
behind the barn, and and then they'd kill them. Yeah. Wow. And not that it's necessarily the most important thing, but is there any sort of tally as to how many they think they were able to?
They said that they were soldiers, and soldiers never say how many people they killed. So they've never told. But
they're probably blocking it out.
Freddie said she would sometimes shoot a man and then feel a strange compulsion to try and help him.
I bet. Well, it's kind of like A Brave New World. You're reading this story about a guy who's on the other side. He may not want to be there any more than you do. Some of them, of course, there are people who had drank the Kool-Aid, but so many of them were just doing what you didn't have any choice.
Right.
There's no option. You were in the army, or you were consigned, and so you were put in this place. Like it or not, this is where you're going to go, and you have to do this. There's no one saying that everyone who was a Nazi or signed up actually believed in any of it.
No.
Or didn't just want to be home with their families.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I imagine, there was those soldiers that believed this was like the patriotic thing to do for their country, and then there was those that had no desire to be in the military, but it was kind of like you didn't have an option.
Well, and more than probably the vast majority of them, if they had just been on the other side, they'd have been doing their duty there. It wasn't about whatever Hitler's agenda was,
right?
Or the Nazi agenda. Most of them, because most of them, I think, we call them Nazis, but really most of them are really soldiers for Germany, and they were essentially, and this is not an apology for them, because they clearly didn't, they clearly allowed it to happen.
Right.
But again, many of them probably really just wanted to go home, just like any soldier in any war.
This is what, is so distinguishing about these girls, is that they went above and beyond and didn't just survive, because obviously Hani didn't survive, but instead of just trying to make it, which is what probably a lot of the Nazi soldiers were doing, was just trying to make it through.
Yeah.
They decided that they weren't just going to try and make it through, but they were going to do something about it, because they had such a strong moral compass that they couldn't allow these things to occur without trying to do something about it.
It's so great. It's so amazing. And obviously, again, back to the, it's a morale affecting grassroots sort of guerrilla warfare, right? They have to do this, because if they do it, it helps incrementally. It helps. It puts doubt in the mind of the soldier. It puts fear in the hearts of them. They don't know where the ghosts are coming from that are taking their people. It's exceptionally important. It's, even if it's just one here, one there, it's constant disruption, and there's never stability.
And if there are multiple resistance factions in different, parts of, the war, different countries, whatever, it all is, adding up and hopefully assisting, the big, military forces that are also trying to deal with the Nazis on a different front. If you are distracting them from their bigger objective, hopefully that's making a difference.
And they're unbalanced, and they're just not feeling as secure as they're not feeling as sort of machismo and robust as they go into something, because they can't even keep their a bunch of guys go out to a bar and one of them disappears every couple of weeks or whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's that's not morale building.
No. Don't drink too much.
These late, right? I'm sure they were. They probably were being told, don't go wandering off into the woods by yourself with somebody you don't know who you're. Don't. But of course, bunch of young boys, it's hard to keep them focused on anything.
There was one more quote that I wanted to read, which was basically, when the two sisters signed up and their mom agreed, it wasn't just the girls. They asked all three whether they could join, and the mom also agreed, which is quite something.
Yeah.
To be willing to allow your daughters of 14 and 16 to risk their lives that way. But they didn't really know what they were in for at first. And so when they learned that they of their roles, especially of killing the Nazis, Freddie said, well, that's something I've never done before.
Oversimplification of I guess that's great. That's great.
Because, she was 14, right?
Yeah.
14 years old.
Can you just imagine being in that place and all? But again, back to the thing. You're riding your bike around your town. You're seeing people put against the wall. It's horrific.
Oh,
you feel powerless. You could be next at any moment. Your family, anyone could be next at any moment. Why not go down with a couple notches on your belt or something?
And the other thing I wanted to bring up is that how very Dutch of them to do these assassinations by bicycle.
Absolutely, yeah.
Ambushing on bike. Just awesome.
And in the dark, we always forget that. It would have been so dark to be out there in the dark,
right,
riding your bike all around, trying to get where you're going, meet people, find people, just the pitch blackness of it all.
Can you imagine the constant anxiety and stress you'd be under? Because you never know the outcome. You never know, have people figured out who I am?
Oh yeah.
Is this my final mission? Am I going to make it out?
Yeah.
You never know.
Is
constantly.
Someone else going to come out of the bar looking for their friend? Yes. Or is someone going to turn me in? Or is someone going to follow me back to where I live? Or is the door going to get banged on one morning while I'm sleeping?
Yeah.
And, you never... Of course, that was a threat at that time for so many people, and certainly any Jewish people, all sorts of people that were under the, that the Nazis were targeting. So those people lived under that threat constantly anyway, without having done anything.
No, absolutely.
At least, but that's the thing, is at least if you're going, you did something.
Right.
Yeah,
and I think that was their whole thing. That was their whole thought process, and they felt compelled. They had to do something and try and make some kind of difference. And unfortunately for Hani, help was not on the way.
Help was not on the way. I have something today. We kind of, I don't know if are we going dark today? We're going a little bit dark today. This is dark, but like we talk about sometimes, these two stories are a little bit, this one's so compelling in its way that is kind of sort of jarring as it is. It's so fascinating on a very different level than your story, that I think it'll bring some light, even though it's kind of dark.
Yes.
Another thing about this is time is the great sort of leveler. So this happened in 1983, which at this point is a long time ago, right? So this is called. Have you ever heard of this? This is called the Byford Dolphin Accident, or it's also known as the Byford Dolphin Explosive Decompression Incident, which I think it's a much more colorful name.
And from what I understand, because when you mention this, the Byford Dolphin has had multiple incidents, right?
Yeah. So the Byford Dolphin is an oil rig, one of those floating sort of. Well, I think it's stationary with these pylons, but it can float and be moved. It's one of those oil rigs, and those things are really dangerous.
Yeah.
So some backstory or sort of like context as to what we're talking about here is this is based around a type of extreme depth diving called saturation diving. And what this is, it's first of all, it's one of the most well-paid and dangerous jobs in the world. I think you make like $1,000 or $2,000 or $3,000 a day if you're one of these. I'd say guys, because I think typically it's men. I don't know of any women who do it, but there may be. It requires divers to live for up to 3 weeks in a chamber that regulates their bodies to the ocean pressure of about 150 meters, or maybe like about 150 feet below the ocean surface. To do this, divers have to enter this large tank. It's kind of like a big chamber, and the atmospheric pressure is slowly raised to approximately 9 times that of the Earth's surface.
Because you're going to be going down so deep, right? That's what.
It's going to be level to where you're going to be working.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Because of course, as we know, water, it has weight to it. So you're pushed down below, and you have this pressure on your body, and you've got all these things. It's an amazing thing. It's an amazing thing. So divers have to breathe this mixture of oxygen and helium to survive. That incredible pressure, and the helium makes their voices squeaky and puts them in a constant state of cold, which is one of the more I've thought a lot about this. So they basically feel kind of chilly, cold all the time while they're down there, but they're I shouldn't say down there all the time. They're compressed for like 3+ weeks at a time. So imagine day and night, everything you're doing all the time, feeling cold, like not really cold, but constant state of, exhausting. It would be exhausting to be, you shiver. Anyway, it's one of the many, many things that is a reason why they're so highly paid. It's exceptionally dangerous work. It's exceptionally exhausting. It's claustrophobic. Since it takes like around 3 days to decompress. I don't remember how long it takes to compress, probably similar. And then to decompress from these pressures, you can't just do this. You can't just do this every day. So it just would be cost ineffective, etc. So what they do is they live for, like I said, about 3 weeks in this compression state. So, and to accomplish this, they have to live in these tubes now, or in these constantly compressed chambers, or while they're diving, they can be out in the water because they're at the depth that they're compressed to. So keep in mind that if they decompress too quickly, that's the whole thing called the bends,
right?
Which is when you get these bubbles. I think it's nitrogen or something bubbles in your bloodstream, and that's really, really, really dangerous.
Yeah. You can die.
You can die. Yeah, you can certainly get headaches. You can get vomiting. You can get long-term effects, debilitating effects throughout the rest of your life, or you can just die.
Yeah.
So what the divers are doing at these depths is they're usually working under oil rigs or deep water construction projects, et cetera, and there's really very little or no light reaches the ocean floor at this depth. So these divers are working for hours on end in blackout conditions. And with only their headlamps, can't really see much. It's really, imagine the ocean floor. There's silt everywhere. There's debris everywhere. It's pretty harsh conditions, and they communicate with one another and the surface deck through radios. But don't forget, they've been breathing a mixture of oxygen and helium, so their voices are really hard to understand. Basically, it's all around just grueling work. But there are a group of people who do this, and they're experts and professionals, and still do this. But the Byford Dolphin, so to give you an idea of what this was, it was a semi-submersible oil drilling rig. It was column stabilized, which means they would put these columns down onto the ocean floor, and it would sit there. We've seen them before in movies and in documentaries and things like that. It could drill up to a staggering 20,000 feet and could operate in water up to 1,500 feet deep.
Wow.
This thing is insane. It was really state of the art for the time. Its deck was about the size of an American football field, and it could be moved small distances under its own power or be tugged by a tugboat if it needed to be moved somewhere far away. And it's normally be in a place like Norway or the North Sea, places like that, which is where this incident happened. And as you mentioned, the Byford had its share of mishaps, but the particular one we're talking about, it was the Byford Dolphin accident or incident, as it's known, happened in the Frigg gas field in the North Sea, so the Norwegian North Sea. So this is November 5th, 1983 at 4:30 in the morning, 4 divers are returning to the surface after a long shift underwater. And to stay compressed, the way this works is basically they're at, as I said, they're able to swim out of, on their own and work at about 150 feet.
Okay.
But to end their shift, or even to start their shift, they go into a diving bell. This big, basically a roundish steel thing that's compressed to that level of the ocean floor.
Right.
The diving bell is raised all the way up to the rig, and stays at compression. Then it attaches. It's very sci-fi. It attaches to a housing, like a coupling, that is attached to a larger living chamber. So what you do is you attach to the coupling, and the living chamber and the diving bell are compressed the same. So they attach it. They have to go through some procedures. They have to make sure one door, is closed, the other one's closed, the whole thing's sealed, and then they can open the 2 doors. They can pass through. They close the door on the diving bell. They close the door on the capsule. They have bed chambers, and there's really claustrophobic. I mean, it's really tiny. You can see pictures of them online. It's barely the size of like, a small minivan.
But probably bigger than the diving bell.
Yeah, bigger than the diving bell. So, and then they can sleep and eat and things, and then they go back down to work. Well, assisting them are two people that are called tenders that are outside the diving bell, and what these guys do is they help attach the coupling, and they sort of then they detach the bell once all the doors are closed. And that sort of just goes and lives until they need to reattach it to bring them back down. Well, that
seems like something could go wrong.
It seems like a lot could go wrong, and there's a lot of issues with it at this time, because clearly there was not. It was in 1983. The technology was there to do this, but the protocols were not well formed. They didn't really have a great way to communicate with the divers in the bell or in the chamber. So what happens here is that, as I say, the communication protocols weren't as established as they are now. And the outside tender, there's this man named William Cramond. His job is to disconnect the bell, and he needs to, and he'd done it a bunch before. He was really, really, really experienced in doing this. And so this is how it happens. Divers Bjorn Bergerson and Truls Hellevik are returning from their dive shift. They've been down working, and they're coming back up to the bell. And in the living quarters already, there were 2 chambers of these 2 other divers, a guy named Edwin Coward and Roy Lucas, and they're resting. And the process, the way this is supposed to happen is like this. First, the diving bell door must be closed. And then the pressure in the diving bell is increased to sort of seal that door shut. Then the chamber door is closed off from that sort of like that coupling trunk, the sort of the pass-through. And then the trunk is depressurized to a normal atmospheric pressure so that the bell can be detached and sort of stored. So Cramond, as I mentioned, who's experienced with this, this is what he did, was he mistakenly released the diving bell clamp before chamber 1 had sealed its door. So the diving bell is secure, but these pivot doors, these sort of like swing, they're sort of like I don't know what I call a butterfly door. It sort of pivots from the middle. It's sort of like it's a disc that sort of pivots
almost
in the middle.
Like a valve or something.
Like a valve, exactly. It was not entirely closed before he disengaged the trunk. So what this created was a massive pressure difference between the outside environment and the chamber, because the chamber is at 9 times normal atmospheric pressure. So it normalized that to normal 1 degree atmospheric pressure in an instant. The result is an explosive decompression. Basically, the air just rushes out of the diving bell. at a massive speed. We've seen this before in like
Right.
movies. You see someone broke the window of the plane and someone gets sucked out. Well, this is that,
Yeah.
but like I think like way
worse.
way worse. So all four. So this is. Sorry, we're about to plug your ears, kids. Yeah. All four divers in the chamber were in the blink of an eye exposed to a shift in atmospheric pressure that's greater than any human body can withstand. This resulted in their immediate and violent deaths. Simultaneously, the massive rush of decompressed air forced the diving bell away from the trunk, basically throwing it, which hit Cramen, the guy who made the mistake, and kills him immediately. The other tender, a man named Martin Saunders, survived the blast but was severely injured. So the divers' deaths are considered some of the most gruesome in history. Although they themselves wouldn't have felt a thing, and it just happened in an instant. The sudden loss of pressure caused 3 of the divers, those that were actually in the chambers, the 2 sleeping, and and Bergerson, who had already climbed into his chamber. It caused their blood to flash boil.
That is insane.
It killed them instantly. The 4th diver, Helvik, who was the one who was in the process of trying to close the butterfly door, he had that airplane incident. He got sucked through what was basically a 24-inch. So imagine the doors being closed, that butterfly door, and there's a crescent space that's 2 feet wide, but not 2 feet deep, or whatever. Yes. Yeah, it's 2 feet. It's maybe like 2 feet wide and 3-4 inches, maybe. He gets sucked through that out into the atmosphere. His body gets sucked through that. He gets cut in half. The whole thing. I mean, it's just terrible. His organs explode out of the capsule. I know, gruesome, right? Sorry, guys. Out of the capsule in all directions for like 30 feet. Just absolute. He's obliterated. He's just evaporated, basically.
I'm not sure which. I mean, it's all instantaneous, right?
Immediate.
Yes. So there is no like preferred.
Right.
Dying by boiling blood or died by complete dismemberment.
Yeah, you could kind of you could trade one for the other.
Right.
I guess the boiling blood, at least you're maybe intact.
Yeah.
Sort of. I don't know. I have a feeling they weren't so intact, though.
Yeah.
Because
with that kind of pressure change, I wonder what it does to.
I think that they may not have. Yeah. I think it may have been, if your blood boiled.
And yeah, because if you have all this pressure pushing on your body and it instantly goes away, what happens to organs and things like that?
I haven't found. Not that, and I'm not so sure I really want to know more. This is pretty gruesome as it is.
Yes, it's definitely gruesome enough.
It's gruesome.
Need to dig into the details.
The details, yeah. So an investigation resulted in the determination that it was human error on the part of Cramen, who released the valve before Helvik had secured the inner door. But, okay, so obviously that's terrible, and you want to put it on Cramen. Part of me is like, okay, at least he died, so he didn't have to live with that for the rest of his life. But the other thing about it is you have to remember that they can't talk to each other.
Right.
So the way they would communicate in the bell out in the to say that the door is locked or give them some sort of signal was to put a bullhorn up against the steel wall and speak into it, thereby making as much noise as possible to hopefully tell the person outside we're good. Now they've been doing this for a long time, so it had been working, but it was a pretty foolish system.
Maybe that's part of the problem is that you get a little lax when you've done it so many times and it keeps working.
Yeah.
I mean, I would think the first 50 times you do it, you're afraid people are going to die if you screw up, so you really pay attention. But maybe on your 100th time of doing this.
It always worked in the past, and Cramen probably knew about how long it took. He'd probably done it enough to trust that we're good here, and all these other things. But we have to keep in mind also that the oil rig deck is super loud. Like there's a lot of noise. They're drilling oil. They're machinery moving around and all this stuff. It's not like he's in a silent space listening to waiting for a tap on the steel or 3 taps and we're good. But also remember that Hellevick has been working for probably around 16 hours straight in pitch black,
right,
harsh weather conditions, constantly cold. He's probably exhausted. He's probably, sort of confused,
sure,
disoriented. He, for all we know, he may have thought it was closed all the way. Nobody knows. He may have misunderstood. He may have given the signal that it's okay to close it. We can't say for sure that Kramen was the one who made the mistake.
Because there's no record of what happened on the inside.
There's no way to tell.
It seems, like in hindsight, when you look at this and that little diagram and everything, I mean, obviously it's quite the elaborate system that a bunch of engineers came up with to make this happen. And then it's kind of like, just take a wrench and whack on the wall or scream through the bullhorn.
That's the best you can do.
Yeah.
Well, also you would imagine that, and it would seem to me, but this isn't the 60s. It would seem to you that by 1983 you could have some sort of sensor that said it's closed.
How about some walkie-talkies? I mean, I just don't.
They're able to communicate. Well, I mean, of course, I don't know all the ins and outs, but they're able to communicate. Well, maybe the steel is too thick for them to be able to use radios at this point. I don't really know. But you could just bang on it with a hammer 3 times and then a pause. Whatever it is. There were not the protocols in place, clearly.
Right.
There have been, obviously, since this incident, like many, triggered, and the investigation and a whole revamp of how they do this. And now it's still an incredibly dangerous job. It's still an incredibly dangerous moment, but it's clearly
and obviously we continue to have really big accidents on oil rigs. I mean, Deepwater Horizon or whatever that one was is another one, a different accident, a different type of accident, but it just seems like these things are just dangerous.
Yeah,
really dangerous.
It's incredibly dangerous work.
I guess that's why you get paid so much.
You get paid a ton to do it. It's hazard pay. Yeah, you get paid to hopefully not evaporate in the blink of an eye, but still they're dangerous places to work.
When you sign up, I wonder if there's a long list of body exploding, dismemberment.
How do you feel about
boiling
being
of your blood?
Yeah, are you dismemberment averse?
Right. Yes, I mean, you're signing here. It says that you are aware that you could have your blood flash boiled or be dismembered.
Hazards, like outside of a pack of cigarettes.
Right.
Maybe they could have some photos. If you do inside and outside the belt. If you do this will happen. Right. Remember to stay focused in this moment.
Right.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah. Workplace security or safety there.
Yeah.
They had to change that over from 200 days of without injuries to 0 days without injuries on the Byford Dolphin.
It kind of makes me wonder about the people that did these jobs because
still do.
Yeah, and do. Is it a special kind of person or special breed of person that does? I mean, it's like if you were to say to me, "Hey, Kevin, we'll pay you $300,000 next year to do what we're just describing here." Right. I would be like, "That's all right, I'm good."
Well, because it's funny you say that because when they said, I want to look this up a little closer because it says it's one of the highest paying jobs in the world. So they get paid $1,000 a day.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you can't do it. You don't get paid $1,000 a day 365 days a year. You get paid $1,000 a day while you're doing it, right? So for a month, but then there are all these protocols. You're not allowed because you can get really sick if you keep doing this too much. You're only allowed to do it so much. So sure, you can go make $30,000 in a month, but you may not be able to work for the next month or two. And look at the sacrifice you're making. Yeah. You're not out enjoying life. You're literally in a bell at the bottom of the ocean or whatever. So it's that whole, so over the course of 6, maybe you can do it, I don't know how much, but maybe you can do it 5 months a year. Right. That's a lot of money, especially for somebody who's got an interesting skill, but not a high level computer skill or banking skill or something like that. That's a lot of money. But the amount of sacrifice you're making is enormous,
Right.
and it's health sacrificing and so much more.
And I can't imagine if you have a family or something, I
Right.
mean, and then there are those kinds of things. There's other professions I think that are similar in that they're high risk. You get paid a lot for what the amount you're working or whatever, but you also are sacrificing so much else besides just having this risk.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I'd like to see if these people are getting paid, $250,000 plus a year and maybe paid while they're not diving. I could see there being, and you can only have to dive like 3-4 months a year maximum. I could see there being a reason for that.
Yeah.
You're getting a lot of your life. You're still you're able to be home with your family, do whatever do things you want to do, and you're making great money.
Right.
But if it's okay, great, that was a great $30,000. We'll see you in 2 months.
Right.
It's like, well, now that you start to spread this out, of course, a lot of these people may not be able to make that kind of money, but you're still it's not as much as it sounds.
Right. If you're only doing it for a certain amount of months of the year,
Yeah.
it's like, if you worked every day, you could make $360,000
Yeah.
or something like ridiculous like that. But you're not working.
You're not working every day. No.
And
And you're cold all the time. Cold all the time. Cold all the time.
the one last thing I wanted to say about this, and I would think this is with so many of these types of disasters, somebody has to go in and investigate and clean up.
Oh, yeah.
What an awful job those
job.
people have, right?
Yeah.
Go into a place that,
You got to poke your head in that little,
Yeah.
opening and go, oh, yeah. Yeah. No.
this was really bad.
Yeah, this one's bad.
Everybody's dead.
And and you get, that's an interesting one. We should do either an Are We Recording, our other podcast, or a Help Is Not in the Way. Because there are sort of death scene cleanup crews. That
Right.
talk about a high paying job.
Yeah.
It's pretty.
And of course, there's also the ones that are the they're called cleaners, except that they're like for the mob, right?
Right.
Make dead bodies disappear.
Disappearing.
Right.
Yeah. They're sort of, yeah.
That's another awful job, I think.
I don't think it'd be
I think it's paid really well.
Yeah. Yeah. Another dangerous job.
And you probably can't quit.
Yeah. One of them you can quit. You'd probably be better off being the one who goes and cleans up after, like the actual
Right.
legitimate one that pays
Yes.
taxes, because then at least at one day you could go, I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah.
I'm done.
Yeah, if you're a cleaner for the mob, you can't quit.
Yeah, you're going to be cleaned one
Yeah.
day is what's going to
That's
happen
right.
to you. Yeah. So this thing, the last thing on this is that the family, there was a big cover up, at least claim of one, and the families, 26 years after all of this, the families did get a payout, some compensation. A lot of things happened. They changed a lot of regulations. They changed a lot of protocols. And interestingly, the dolphin, the Byford dolphin, was scrapped only 2019. It's been around all that time.
Well, looking at the Wikipedia page on this, I mean, there were sounds like 7 other people that died in separate incidents.
Yeah.
Like 6 fell out of a lifeboat after.
Yeah, someone got hit in the head with like a swing arm.
So,
or
I
something
mean-
like that. Oh, these things it's dangerous business.
So I mean, how many died in this incident they were talking about? Was
5.
it 5?
And one severely injured.
And 7 more. I mean, so 12 people died on this thing.
Yeah, this thing's
At least, right?
this thing's got a reputation. But have you ever seen footage of like high seas around these things?
Oh, it's so crazy.
It's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
And you got to imagine some people are on that, and it's just like slamming. The ocean is a crazy place.
The Help Is Not on the Way could solely do stories about Help Is Not on the Way in the ocean.
In the ocean.
Right. I mean,
the oil rig series. Yeah. We find out like 12 years from now we're still doing them, and then this other guy, he fell down the
Right.
thing and his head popped off. Oh, it's so gruesome. Sorry, everybody, but it's hard to laugh. But that's why we tell stories from a long time ago, so we can put some distance between us.
right.
And maybe
Unfortunately, I
crack a
couldn't
joke or
laugh
two.
too much at mine because it involved Nazis. It's hard to. I mean,
And teenagers.
and teenagers, yeah. At least the teenagers were killing the Nazis.
That's the good part.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the good part.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. It's that's the way we like to tell the stories. When the teenagers are killing the Nazis, it's a good story.
That's right.